Did you know that originally in The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess for Nintendo Wii, instead of swinging the Wii remote to attack, you instead had to press the B button? Back in E3 2006, Nintendo showcased a live gameplay demo of Twilight Princess, and you can see that the B button had your sword icon in it, unlike in the final release where you would have an item instead. Even Bill Trinen himself mentions it.
Your basic sword swings are handled using the B button on the bottom of the Wii remote.
The crazy thing about all this is the game released 6 months later from the showing of the demo, and with it as well came many other changes to its control scheme. The change was likely due to wanting to showcase more of the capabilities of the motion controls, and with this change Nintendo went ahead and mirrored the entire game. Link is normally left-handed, so players holding the Wii remote with their right hand and seeing Link swing with his left may have just feel odd to some people. But nonetheless, today I wanted to go ahead and discuss with you all the development of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess development started back in 2003, initially started as a sequel to the then underappreciated Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker. That on its own can be its own video, but when talking about the development of Twilight Princess, you need to bring up what happened during this time period. You see, back in Space World 2000, an annual show hosted by Nintendo went ahead and showcased a tech demo of a potential Zelda game would look like on the upcoming Nintendo GameCube. This showed a realistic depiction of Ganondorf and Link fighting. This led to many people to believe that this was the upcoming Zelda game, but when Space World 2001 arrived, fans were upset to see a cartoony cel-shaded art style. This led The Wind Waker to unfortunately have poor sales and make Nintendo pursue a more realistic art style for the next game. E3 2004, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess was shown off for the first time and provided one of the most insane crowd reactions to ever grace this earth. It ended with Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of The Legend of Zelda, to come out on stage to a standing ovation.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Shigeru Miyamoto.
It wasn't until the Game Developer Conference, or GDC as it's known as, in March of 2005, where we finally get another look at The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. It wasn't until a couple of months later, during E3 2005, the fans and journalists would finally get the chance to see actual gameplay, but also be able to play the demo themselves. Not only that, many journalists were able to interview Mr. Eiji Aonuma, who is the director of Twilight Princess. Looking at the demo, this build of the game is about a year and a half older before we got to the final release, so there is a lot of changes. Keep in mind, this is May of 2005, and from what I was able to see, plans to port Twilight Princess to the Nintendo Revolution, later dubbed the Nintendo Wii, wasn't decided internally in Nintendo until the end of 2005. Let's start with the HUD. Since, like I mentioned, this version predates the thought of porting the game to the Wii, we're gonna primarily reference the GameCube version here. We can see that the R trigger had a button where the Z button in the final release is located, and not only that, it seems like Link was going to be able to crouch in the same way that you can do that action on the Wind Waker. Not only that, looking at the D-pad, the item menu was able to be brought up with both D-pad up and down. Looking at the animations, primarily when Link is riding Epona, it seems like Epona's animations were ripped off from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and just looking at how Epona gallops around gives me the same vibes. Not only that, it sounds like Link's voice was also ripped out of Ocarina of Time adult Link's. This was likely just a placeholder, and I also feel the same goes with Epona's galloping animations, as those probably were just not really fully kind of animated or really focused during this time frame. There's also many differences on the goat minigame, where when a goat goes back to the barn, you get the yeehaw prompt instead of in the final release, we actually get the prompt goat in. Going further into the footage, we can see that Link was actually able to grow a canoe, which was likely the original way of getting the baby cradle, as we are able to go ahead and see in the demo that the cradle actually just goes down the stream, so this was likely the original way or method of us to get the cradle in the final release, but honestly, I am unsure of that. This also just could have been just a thing for the demo. Also, I want to go ahead and point this out that this is not Ordon Village. During the beta here and on interviews, journalists actually call this village Toaru Village. I fortunately couldn't find when the name change was made to Ordon Village in the final release, but from what I was able to find out, Toarumura was the name of Ordon Village in the Japanese version, which is a pun on the Japanese phrase, a certain village. The way how the demo ends for the Ordon portion is that Link was able to steal Rossal's sword, and if he's able to do so, he lends Link the sword. Again, this was likely just for the demo, but in the final release, this was something that we were not able to do. The only weapon that we do get when it comes to Link being in Ordon Village early on in the final release of the game was the wooden sword. Link speaks with Rossal once again, returning the sword, and that is how the Ordon demo portion ends. The next portion of the demo we see is the infamous horseback scene where Link has to save Colin from King Boblin. Really the only difference here are the icons for both the sword and potentially just the way how the red potion looks that you have access to, but even then, there's not really much of any changes here. We also get a chance to see the item menu showing that the items were going to be in boxes, while in the final release, there wasn't any form of boxes. It looks like it would just stay blank. The only other differences is just how cinematic this fight looks, seeing the time of the day change and also seeing what seems like rain pouring down. This kind of tells me that maybe the game was supposed to have a more dynamic weather system with its final release, but it honestly could have just been added for a more cinematic battle in this demo, and also just to show off a bit of the potential weather system we could have expected in the final release. Another thing that I noticed is that the art button while on horseback shows the prompt defend. Maybe we were able to pull out our shield potentially while on horseback? Now, the final area that we get to explore is the first dungeon in the game, and we actually get to see the defend prompt and the R button returned. In the final release, targeting your opponent is how you pull your shield out, but during the demo, L targeting was the only thing that the L button would do, while the R button would have to be pushed if you want to raise your shield. We also get to see Link do a finishing blow against an enemy, and really all in all, it's pretty much the same as we got in the final release. The only thing I find cool is just seeing Link seeming to have more animations added to him. I don't know if it's just me, but he really seems to be moving a lot more smoothly. Not to say that he doesn't in the final release, but that's just kind of what he looks like to me here. It looks like they added a couple more extra frames when it comes to his animation. He also seems to have different sword combos, leading me to believe that he was supposed to be more like in the Wind Waker, how that Link had a lot more of a flashy, over-the-top attacks. So maybe we're going to get the same here as well. Not only that, if Link wants to parry, instead of pressing R in the final release to shield parry, here Link parries when he has his shield up with the R button, and then pressing B will allow him to parry. I also just want to say that even when Link has his shield away, he can still press R to pull out his shield, so maybe the crouch pump was only for when Link doesn't have a shield? Honestly, I don't know. Later in the demo, Link gets the Gale Boomerang, which had a completely different design as in the final release. Going through the dungeon seems to be the same as the final release, and completing the dungeon is the end of the demo, which leads to small snippets of gameplay where we see different areas such as the Lost Woods and a look at Skull Kid, but that is the end of the E3 2005 demo. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess internally had a release date of 2005, but thankfully Mr. Iwata and the other higher-ups figured it would be a lot better to not only delay the game for another year, but to also even consider the fact of creating a port for the Wii. With the approval of this delay, reading an Iwata Ask interview where then President Satoru Iwata sat with many of the dev team, and he was able to go ahead and get that a lot of the devs were actually really happy to hear that they were given an extra year. In said interview sitting with Eiji Aonuma, Iwata stated that the release of Twilight Princess was postponed by a year from the originally planned date, wasn't it? That was actually the very first time that I have ever suggested to Miyamoto-san that we delay the release of a game by a year. I was very aware that it would be a real challenge to complete the project on time, but most of all, I knew that we had to do everything to ensure that this would be our masterpiece, the greatest Zelda of all time. Aonuma replied, I really felt bad for all the fans who were waiting for the game, but to be completely honest, I was grateful for it. At the time, the decision to postpone the release date was taken. We had an abundance of really interesting material for the game, but we hadn't finished tying it all together. Of course, there were parts of the game that were complete, but there were also lots of places which simply weren't yet playable at that time. When you showed that playable version at E3, I just saw how many great elements were in the game, but that they were still in a state of disarray. You faced a big challenge bringing them all together, didn't you? Right. For that reason, I was very grateful for the extra year. I don't know how the other staff reacted to the news though. Perhaps they felt that even though they had to work so hard, they still had another year to go. But I think that in order to fully realize everything that they had come up with, that extra time was vital. With that, it wasn't until E3 2006 that we got another look at Twilight Princess, but this time instead of the GameCube version, we finally got our first look of Twilight Princess on the newly named Nintendo Wii. May 2006, the day a lot of people were waiting for, Nintendo's showcase was up, and in it, we saw Bill Trinen showcase gameplay of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, but on the upcoming Nintendo Wii. Though the game looks a bit more refined and close to the final release, it's here where we surprisingly see a lot of changes if you were someone who played the Wii version at launch. Keep in mind, this is in May, while the game released on November 19th of that same year, and the GameCube version released on December 11th. As I mentioned, Link would attack with the press of the B button, which was changed at the final release to be with a swing of the Wii Remote. Another change is that the pointer controls were going to be more important than what we got in the final release. What I mean by this is that in the final release, the fairy pointer crosshair was just used for aiming with some of your items. In this E3 demo, if you wanted to access your item wheel, you would have to use the pointer and go over to where your items are on the D-pad and press A. Then you hover over the item you want and would use either the left, down, and right D-pad input to add it to as a quick access. In the final release, you simply press minus to open up your wheel, and you can use that same D-pad inputs as in the demo, but you can also now put another item on the B button. Looking at the demo, if you wanted to use an item, you would just go ahead and press the D-pad input it is currently placed on. While on the final release, you had to push the D-pad input and then press the B button to use it. Also, with the fairy pointer, you can access your map while hovering over the mini-map on the left bottom side of the screen. Overall, it seems like the pointer controls had a bit more of a significant role here. A quick thing that I also want to mention, this was likely here just for the demo, but you can see when the item wheel is brought up that Link has the claw shot. This was likely just here for the demo, but honestly, I can't really explain or even look up online as to why this item was here. Maybe the way we would have gone the claw shot was completely different than what it is in the final release? Who knows? While showcasing the map, I also noticed something very interesting about Link's face here, which is typically used in Zelda games to inform the player what floor they're in. In this E3 demo, a 3D model is here compared to the final releases, it had a 2D model. Another really cool thing about the fairy pointer is that it seems like when you target an enemy, it would actually change the color to yellow and follow around the enemy, in the same way that Navi and Taro did back in classic Zelda games. This is something I really would have loved if Nintendo kept, but for some odd reason, they just got rid of it. The demo then shows off a bit of the aiming and using items such as the bow. In the demo here, Link has a mini clear circle in the center screen while the outside of it has a transparency black portion of it. If the pointer is out into the black transparency portion of it, this will make the camera change direction as to where Link is aiming at, while the center is more like this is where the camera will lock into and you can just shoot wherever your cursor is at. In the final release, they got rid of this and just made it that you can use the analog stick to move the camera left and right, and the Wii Remote to aim and even move the camera up and down. Then is shown off fighting against another enemy here, and you can see that while the player is targeting the enemy, if you thrust the Wii Remote forward, you would do your shield bash or parry as it's called. In the original, this was done with the nunchuck controller, so not a major change, but I would say a welcome change as it makes more sense to be the nunchuck controller to me to be used to parry. Another change that I'm very happy that was made here was that we see Link pick up a crate, and instead of shaking the Wii Remote to throw the box like in the final release, here we have to shake the nunchuck controller. Other than that, Bill Trinan continues on narrating over the gameplay, and from what I can see, there really wasn't anything else that is different compared to the final release. The game was still in the same perspective as in the GameCube version and not mirrored. Looking at journalists who had the chance to play in the game on the show floor, the boss here being the second dungeon in the final release is the same and is defeated the exact same way as in the final release. Zelda Twilight Princess also had another demo on the show floor, giving players a chance to try out the fishing mechanics, which seems to have had a bit more of a basic overhaul in the final release. The demo shows Link and a random girl rowing a canoe. The random girl seems to me like she is an early look of Henna. So talking more about the fishing itself, it seems like Link would use the Wii Remote to raise and swing the controller to throw his line. And if you were to use the nunchuck and rotate it, it seems like that was actually the way how you were able to go ahead and reel it in. Though it seems like if you did not want to do this motion, it seems like there was also button inputs that you can use as well. Other than the icons for the fishing rod being different and it actually being a rod and not a pole, there really isn't much of a difference here. And that is honestly everything that I was able to find about the development of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, primarily in regards to early footage that Nintendo used as an advertisement for this game. There's a ton of stuff I didn't go through, such as more interviews with journalists and even going through even more of the deep content type routes, but I primarily wanted to focus on the times Nintendo actually came out and showcased the game during a form of live event. The game continued to be shown off throughout the entirety of the year there and other events such as Gamescom, but I couldn't find any footage of this or thereafter E3 2006. I also want to go ahead and take the time here and mention that I have beaten Twilight Princess on the GameCube and even on the Wii U version, but I have never beaten it on the original Wii. I do own the Wii version. Even back then when I was a kid, my brother bought a Wii with it, but I remember just going through the game and really was just not a fan of the motion controls. My brother actually hated it, meanwhile I kind of tolerated it, but I just remember going through the game and I really was not a fan of the motion controls. This time around I decided to pick up the Wii version as the way that I would be replaying this game, and while doing so it made me curious to look more into the development of this game. It honestly made me upset looking at the E3 2006 demo that the control wise that we got there wasn't what we got in the final release. I understand why Nintendo did the change, but even still, now replaying through the game, it still feels clunky stinging the Wii Remote to attack. It especially feels clunky to me when you are in wolf form. But I digress. I'm still enjoying my time on the Wii version compared to when I was a kid, but I personally still believe that the GameCube version is the definitive way to experience this masterpiece. With that being said, guys, let me know how you guys played through Twilight Princess for the first time. Was it on the Wii? Was it on the GameCube? Or was it even on the recent HD re-release back in 2015 with the Wii U version? Like I mentioned, I know there's still a lot of things that I didn't go through, like looking through some old classic magazines and stuff, which I even remember seeing those screenshots back then when I was a kid, when my brother actually had things like Game Informer and stuff coming in the mail for us. But I just, again, wanted to mainly focus on just the actual footage and like the big mainline events, you know, live events that Nintendo did for Twilight Princess. Yeah, I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.